Welcome. This is the February 28th, 2018 hearing of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. On the record for the matters that are going to be before us today. First agenda item is the per acre bonding cost for small mines and exploration. And if you'd identify yourself for the record and begin.
Chairman Gill, my name is Wayne Western. I work for the Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, particularly on the minerals side. I do some of the reclamation costs for the bonds, and what we're going to do today is present our estimates for the per acre cost to reclaim small mines. As most of you are aware of, the legislature passed a law that required that the division present the reclamation costs to you on a yearly basis, and that you would review them, and that it would also give the public an opportunity to comment on our reclamation costs. Our bond calculations for small mines and exploration projects are based on two methods. One is an average cost per acre, which the board will establish, and the other one is site-specific calculations based on a detailed reclamation plan. It's prepared by the division and with input by the operators, and it's verified by the division on a per basis. Okay. The board will establish the average cost per acre, and of course, the division gives a presentation, and the most important part is that the public has an opportunity to make comment. The average cost per acre, we have developed two model mines. One is a 5 acre and one is a 10 acre, and they were based on our large mines that are under 50 acres of disturbance, and that we usually use a similar piece of equipment, and then we use the unit costs for the same large mines, and we have those pared down for a small mine. As I mentioned before, we have 5 and 10 acre models, mine models, and one for exploration. Our assumptions are that there's going to be no surface facilities removed. If there are, then we would include that as a line item. There are going to be no leach pads, and that the main pieces of equipment that will be used are an excavator and or a dozer. The direct costs for reclamation include earthwork, revegetation, possibly closure of underground openings, exploration holes, and surface facilities, if any. The indirect costs include mob, demob, contingency, an engineering redesign, main office expense, and project management. We also include an escalation cost that for small mines, the operator has the option of either going with a 3 or a 5-year escalation. The equipment and labor selection are based on haul distances. We assume that it would not require a truck and a loader, so everything's compact, a dozer for pushing, an excavator for digging materials, a pickup truck for support, and equipment operators plus 1 laborer. The equipment for the 5 acre model mine is basically an excavator, which we would have 10 hours of reclaiming roads, 9 hours reclaiming high wall, 7 hours establishing drainage, 15 hours grading, 9 hours pocking, for a total of 50 hours. And this is based on our large mines when we would prorate them down to a 5 acre site. Then we would use the unit costs We use those from RS Means and Blue Book, and then we are able to establish a per acre cost for the total. For the 10-acre mine, we assume that we would have to bring in an additional piece of equipment. In this case, it's a dozer that would require an extra 25 hours for backfilling, 10 hours for topsoil placement, 10 hours for ripping. And so, again, with the excavator, for a total of 95 hours total to reclaim a 10-acre site. And then we will use those unit costs on a cost per basis to come up with the total, depending upon how many acres are at the mine. As I mentioned before, we use industrial standard references such as Equipment Watch Blue Book and RS Means. We will also, in some cases, go with reclamation costs from the coal program or AML. They're based on 25 years of experience. The revegetation amounts, we assume if the revegetation is going to be done in conjunction with the earthwork, that it's $500 an acre, and if we are going to come back later, we would require $1,000 per acre because of seed bed preparation. For portals and shafts, we have $2,000 per acre for up to a maximum of 6-foot square, and for shafts, $3,000 for up to a 6-foot diameter. Anything larger than that, we would we would calculate that out based on some AML work and some other costs that we've incurred in the past when we've had to close those facilities. As I mentioned before, we assume that there's going to be minimal no surface facilities, and any demolition to remove things like fuel tanks, sheds would be line items. The mob costs can be a major factor in it. What we have done is we've assumed that a base cost would be 50 miles one way, and then we add in 50-mile increments. We assume that the equipment will be loaded directly onto trailers, only one pilot car would be needed, and that the dozer mobilization is needed for only in those cases of 5 acres or more. This is a look at our indirect costs. We have a 10% contingency fee, 2.5% engineering redesign, a main office, and a project management fee. The escalation, we're using RS Means Historical Cost Index, and for 2018, it's 1.78%. And as I mentioned before, the small mine operators have an option of either going with a 3 or a 5-year escalation. These are the costs for the minimum bond amount for the first acre. Depending upon the escalation period, it would either be $7,700 or $8,000, and then would go up either $5,100 for 3 years or $5,300 for a 5-year. For the total would be $28,100 for 3 years and $29,200 for a 5-year escalation. For areas that are up to from 6 to 10 acres, the 6th acre would be $37,100 for 3-year escalation, $38,500 for 5-year. Then it would go up per acre to $5,800 for a 3-year escalation, or $6,000 for a 5-year escalation. So for the total amount we would have is $60,300 for 3-year, or $62,500 for a 5-year escalation. The exploration amounts are the same for the exploration projects, but we only escalate for 1 year because the permits are only good for up to the November of the following year. So on the reclamation costs, we will do those on a yearly basis. Basically, we haven't changed our methods that we've done in the past. Our costs have gone up slightly from 2017, And what we'd like the board to do is approve these amounts until 2019. Any questions?
Board members, any questions? Okay, Susan?
Have we done any checking after the fact to find out if the bond amounts were appropriate, either
Yes.
too high or too low?
Yes, we have. We are keeping track for our operations, and we're coming in right about even. So we're not, I've had the opportunity to reclaim a couple of projects, and we've just had basically the right amount of bond. We're not over and we're not under. So for the small mines, it looks like we're pretty good.
Wayne, I know you've got many years' experience doing this, and it's kind of a sometimes it's a difficult calculation to make, and it sounds like you're doing an excellent job. And I commend you for that. I just had a few questions about some of the things you were discussing on costs. If you have to remove facilities, that's a line item.
Yes.
Addition? Okay, so no surface facilities are anticipated in the per acre cost.
Right. Usually for the small mines, you're not going to see much in the way of surface facilities.
And then one question I had was on the cost for shaft and portal reclamation. What on your shaft? You mentioned it's a 6 foot diameter max. What's the depth of the shaft in your calculations?
Usually on those, what would happen is you would put in some type of a plug, so the depth would not necessarily be a factor on it, but in the past what AML does is they would go down maybe 10, 15 feet. They would put in some type of a platform, and then they would use an expanding foam. And then on top of that, there would be a 6-inch concrete cap that's reinforced. And that depends somewhat site specific. If it was if it was a shallow shaft, then there would also be the option in there to backfill. One of the disadvantages of just doing a backfill is that you can have some settling, and that would require monitoring and then going back in. And usually what we want to do on a reclamation forfeiture is to reclaim the site all at once and just have to worry about the seeding later on.
And so the cost of the plug is already in your calculation for the
Yes.
shaft. And then the portals, I believe you had 32 square feet.
Yes, a 6 by 6 is what we're normally encountering in a small mine operation. So if it was larger than that, then we would calculate that out and put that in as a separate line item.
Just for my own information, how does the state reclaim a mineral mine portal as compared to a coal mine?
Okay. Backfilling would be one method of doing it. We don't have quite the MSHA regulations as in the coal. We are in the process of working with a landowner to reclaim a humate portal that basically the operator died, and the heirs are working with us and the contractor and the BLM to close the site. It's in a area where it would be difficult to bring in fill, and we worked with MSHA, and what we're going to do is put in a foam plug to seal it off, and then we would put in concrete slab to minimize vandalism, people getting in.
Okay, and just one other question, and this is again just for my own information. You ever anticipate with some of these small mine operators putting in bat screens over some of these portals in lieu of plugging or sealing?
That could happen if there were bats that were using them, and this could be something where You know, if they had closed down and then the bats had moved in, of course we would want to put in some type of a bat gate if feasible, to allow the bats to use the mine and then keep the public out.
That would be something that would be post mining. That would not be
Right.
anticipated when you're originally
Right. Originally,
calculating the bond.
originally we were just figuring that we would backfill the portal. That's usually the standard practice. Some cases we might be looking at an extended period of time before we could reclaim, and if the bats had moved in, then we would be willing to use the bat gate to allow them to have the habitat.
Well, thank you, Wayne.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I have a couple. I have actually a request. First, but thank you, Wayne, for that presentation and all that you do. I would like to see what the reference to resources, the Blue Book and the RS means, is that correct?
Yes.
I'd like to see what one of those pages looks like for a dozer and an excavator. And does that include the operator with that, or is that a...
Okay, for the dozers, it includes the rental costs, and then it includes the operating costs. For the labor, we use RS means, but I could certainly get you a...
Just, I'd like to see what one of those looks like.
Right, and I'll bring one in to you. As soon as I'm done with my presentation, I'll photocopy the information and then bring it back to you.
If you would, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. Being no other questions, well, appreciate your presentation, and we'll move on to our next. Oh, we have to make a vote, though, don't we?
No, excuse me.
What is the vote that we need to?
There should be an opportunity for the public to make comment.
I beg your pardon. That is so correct. Is there anyone from the public here that would like to address this issue or on per acre bonding costs for small mines and for exploration? I see none. Then it's to the board to approve those. Is that correct?
Yes.
Board members, is a motion in order?
I'll move that we approve those costs.
Is there a second to that?
Second that.
Any discussion? The motion before you is to approve the per acre bonding cost for small mines and explorations as proposed today. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Let the record show that that was unanimous. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We're on to agenda item number 2. Would like to know how long it would take to set up, but let me read it into the record. Before I do that, while they're setting up, I have another matter I'd like to just take care of. This is docket number 2017-024, cause number 139-149, in the matter of Axia Energy 2 LLC. This matter was fully heard in October 2017, and an interim order granting the petition as to certain lands was issued in January 2018. This matter has been continued multiple times as EP Energy, EMP Company, and Axia Energy 2 LLC attempted to negotiate a resolution to EP's objections as to the remaining lands. EP's objections were formally withdrawn on February 20th, 2018. The board understands that Axia will be submitting a proposed form of final order in the near future. This matter is continued until the March 2018 regularly scheduled hearing, although the board anticipates that it may issue a final order resolving the matter before that date. Okay, we're now down to the second agenda item, docket number 2017-024, cause number 139-149, in the matter of Axia Energy 2. I think that's the one we just discussed. I didn't realize they were the same thing. And then, is that correct? So we're now on the third agenda item?
Yes, sir.
Okay, third agenda item is docket number 2018-001, cause number 131-153, in the matter of Crescent Point Energy U.S. Corporation. We'll now take appearances of counsel.
One moment, Mr. Chairman.
Take the time you need. Just remember that we're being live streamed on YouTube.
Good morning, board members. Brent Chicken, Fox Rothschild, LLP, on behalf of Crescent Point Energy U.S. Corp.
Good morning. Steve Alder, Utah Attorney General's Office for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Is there any other party that is represented by counsel? Seeing none, we're to you, Mr. Chicken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to wait one moment until the IT exhibits are up. It's just a PDF, dude. I usually just plug right in like this. So. The spacing is just each day. I have the other thing in here. Feel. Yeah, I even got one of these for sure. I don't have it on the thumb drive. I mean, is there another connector we can use? I've got another port over here. We could use USB or something, but it's not even. Yeah. No, I mean, it's not even on any of the screens. And it's plugged in, so I don't know why.
Board members, after this hearing is completed, we'll have a short joint meeting in the deliberation room.
It's just a PDF, man. This? I'm just saying I've never had to do this in the last 2 years of hearings, so I don't know what's going on.
No, it's fine. We might have to just kind of move forward with this.
For those that might be viewing this hearing on YouTube, we're just making sure we've got all the technical parameters taken care of. And so we'll just have some technical things we're working on for a moment.
Exactly. That's not. I mean, look, I've got. You have a. I mean, you have a VG. He's got a VGA. I have one of those. I mean, they all work. I have this. Do you have a VGA? Like output. I also have this output on the other side of it too, which is where I usually plug in. So if they have a connector for that to that, because I don't think I have one of these. This is not going to that TV, is what's going on, based on what I just said. Sure can.
Sorry about this.
No problema, dude.
You may need to tell the computer to output it too.
It is. It is.
Mirror it.
Display clone. Yeah. Like, it's making it to there. It's just not going to there. I guess.
In duplicate mode.
Clone, yeah.
Okay, just going to, let me just power some of this real quick.
I have a VGA adapter too. So you have a VGA cable. I didn't bring the. I got an adapter. There you go.
Just need to power some. Apologize. You got it?
Thank you. Okay, we're ready. Thank you for your patience, board. As the board is aware, Crescent Point Energy has recently had approved spacing in the Randlet area by this board in order most recently in order 131-151, but the process of that of the Randlet area goes all the way back to order 131, 149, and 131, 150. And in those orders, this board approved 40-acre spacing for vertical and directional wells, overlapping 640-acre spacing for short lateral or less than up to 1 mile horizontal wells, and 1,280-acre spacing or the equivalent for up to 2-mile lateral wells. In those orders, we've already made some provisions for what we're going to be talking about today. We've got some weird shaped lands over on the far eastern border of those 131, 151 lands because we directly abut the Uinta Special Meridian. And because of that, the 131, 151 order already has some language in there that proportionately reduces the amount of horizontal wells allowed in connection with these non-standard governmental sections. We've got sections along this line. I think one of them only has 8. It's a governmental section. I think it has 86 acres. So they're very small. And what we made a decision, rather than trying to go back and shoehorn this special little piece in to the 131, 151 order, it made more sense to just pull the two sections that were already in that order out and have its own order for this weird shaped land. I think it really is going to help the board understand what we're asking for here better, and allow you to focus more on the setbacks and the reasons that we're asking to be able to drill the wells on this piece of land. And so specifically what I'm talking about is in Township 4 South, 3 East, we're dealing with sections 6, 7, and 18. You'll see from our exhibits that 6, 7, and 18 collectively encompass 1,003 acres, so it's a very small, non-standard governmental survey area. 7 and 18 were already included in Order 131, 151, and were subject to that proportionate horizontal and horizontal well reduction, well number reduction, I should say. And so really all we're doing is we're, in this case, we're asking this board to pull 7 and 18 out of the 151 order and do its own order for this special 1,003 acre spacing unit. Along those lines, I think the board can take administrative notice of the testimony and exhibits taken in orders 131, 149, and 131, 150. A lot of everything that was testified to there applies equally, obviously, to these lands, to this one little one, the 6 that we're adding in. There's no other orders other than 131, 151 covering this 1,003 acres we'll talk about today. So there's no other orders that we need to worry about changing or amending. We're essentially just going to vacate 131, 151 as to those 2 sections and create a new order just for them. I think the main reason we've done this is just to avoid confusion and to avoid unnecessarily complicating the 131, 151 order. The BLM has submitted a comment letter in this matter yesterday, and they approved the relief requested. And so I'm going to go right into our testimony here, but I do need to get on the record, and I've spoken to division staff and division counsel. The exhibits that we submitted in this matter on January 29th had a exhibit lettering error, so the geology and engineering exhibits were off by 1 letter. What you will see today is the right exhibit letters, and we will be submitting the correct ones, correcting that typographical error. There have been no changes whatsoever from a substantive nature to any of the exhibits from what we have submitted on the 29th of January. They're identical, but we just happened to notice as I was teeing it up this week that we were off by 1 letter on some of them.
Okay, and while we're on that subject, on the witnesses' resumes, we normally have that as an exhibit. Do you have an exhibit P? Can we call that the next exhibit? And that's the witnesses' resumes.
Certainly, and I can. And when I still have to forward this to the division for filing, and so when I do that, I can make those.
Just make those as an
Resumes as
additional
exhibits.
exhibit, whether it's P or the next one in line is all.
They have been submitted already, along with the
All right.
the exhibits, but I will make sure that those are submitted.
Let's have you identify your witnesses and then have them sworn at this time.
Sure, no problem. You want to do them all at once? Correct.
Yes, please.
Okay. So our land witness. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Our Crescent Point's land witness today is sitting to my left. This is Mr. Andrew Stone. Our geology witness is Mr. Phil LeMay, and our engineering witness is Mark Ballard. Mr. Stone and Mr. LeMay have not appeared before this board before. Mr. Ballard has.
Okay.
And I presume you want me to qualify them individually prior to their testimony.
And division, do you have any witnesses that you intend to call today?
No, we do not.
Well, let's have the witnesses then that you've identified be sworn at this time.
Stand up, gentlemen.
Will you raise your right hands? You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Proceed with your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our first witness for Crescent Point Energy is Andrew Stone, sitting to my left. Mr. Stone, if you could please identify yourself, your position with Crescent Point, and spell your name for the record, and then give the board a brief background of your experience. I think starting with college should be sufficient.
My name is Andrew Stone, ANDREW STONE. I am a landman at Crescent Point. I graduated college, University of Denver in 2014. Started with Crescent Point in October of 2014. Various different land positions throughout those past 3.5 years, and all basically focused in Utah, specifically in Randelette.
I'm going to interrupt you here to let you know that your testimony is being recorded.
Yes,
And so we invite you to bring the mic within at least 1 to 2 inches of when you're speaking.
is that better?
Thank you.
Okay. Would you like me to repeat?
No.
Okay.
I guess at this point, we're not seeking to qualify Mr. Stone as an expert witness, just as a fact witness. So unless there's other initial preliminary stuff, I'll just go right into it.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Crescent Point's first exhibit is Exhibit A, which is a regional locator map, and I'll ask Mr. Stone to please describe what's depicted on Exhibit A.
The subject lands are approximately 28 miles south of Vernal via Highway 40 and 88. They're also approximately 6 miles southeast of Randelette. As well on the map, you can see Gusher, Fort Duchesne, Roosevelt, and Ballard. And the lands are highlighted in yellow.
And in relation to the Order 131, 151 lands, where would those lands be in relation to today's subject lands?
The subject lands are going to be directly east of 151, and they're going to just be right up against the meridian line, so directly to the west of the meridian line.
And what's shown on here, and I'm using my mouse to show this, but sections 7 and 18 down here were originally included in 131, 151, correct?
That is correct.
We'll move on to Crescent Point Exhibit B, which is our general notice outline. And if Mr. Stone could please describe what's depicted on here in the context of notice for Crescent Point's request for agency action.
Correct. So the cause outline will be outlined in yellow, depicting sections 6, 7, and 18. Nearly a triangle, with the exception of section 17 down there in the very bottom that is not included. Outlined in blue, that is going to be the half-mile buffer. And all leased and unleased working interest mineral owners involved within the subject lands and within that blue half-mile buffer have been notified of this RAA. The interested parties will also receive notice of the hearing through the board via mail and newspaper publication. Neither Crescent Point Energy nor the board has received any responses or protests to Crescent Point's RAA.
Just a few points of clarification from in here. So it is correct that there's no other board orders covering these lands other than the 131, 151 order, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so we're actually just seeking to extend that order to this piece of land here, and really it's extending it to section 6, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then we're not seeking to Crescent Point doesn't seek to amend 131, 151 because this order, or what we're requesting today, I should say, the setbacks are going to be different, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And what does that do to?
It's just due to the irregular shape of these governmental sections. They're just not regular.
And I think, unless the board requires otherwise, I think one difference that's important to point out here would be Crescent Point is not seeking the imposition of annual reporting requirements or a 5-year sunset on this particular tract due to Crescent Point's 100% ownership and the tribal nature. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Sorry. So if we move on now to Exhibit C for Crescent Point, if you could please describe, Mr. Stone, what's depicted on this, and specifically in the context of Crescent Point's ownership in the lands.
This is a mineral ownership map of the lands. As you can see, there's a table on the left, and the lands within, or the minerals within the subject land are 100% tribal, and they are 100% owned by Crescent Point Energy.
And has Crescent Point been in touch with the BLM, BIA, and the tribe regarding this RAA and the development of these lands?
Due to past spacing orders and our current affairs with the tribe, other EDAs that we have within the basin, we did not consult the tribe on this, strictly due to the similarities and agreements that we have in the past.
Right. So, but it's fair to say that the tribe is aware that we're here today asking for this, and they haven't voiced a problem with that.
Very much so.
Okay. Moving on to Exhibit D1, and I'll preface this by saying Exhibits D1 through D4 are going to kind of go through similar to the 131, 151 order, the specific spacing, how many 40-acre units we're asking for, et cetera. So on Exhibit D1 here, could you please describe the vertical or directional well spacing units being sought?
Yes, so each vertical well will be on a 40-acre equivalent basis. These are the same rules that are under UDOGM spacing already. And the production from these vertical directional wells will be allocated on a 40-acre drilling and spacing unit basis.
And just to clarify, if we're looking again, I'll use my pointer here. This is Section 6, this is 7, and this is 18. 7 and 18 under Order 131, 151 already has this 40-acre spacing scheme imposed, correct?
That is correct.
We'll move on to Exhibit D2. If you could please describe the short lateral horizontal development that we're seeking for approval today.
Correct. So as stated before, 7 and 18 already allow for short lateral horizontal wells, as well as one per section from the UDOGM rules. Please note that each short lateral horizontal well will be allocated on a 640-acre drilling and spacing unit basis, and it will not impact the production allocation from the overlapped vertical and directional 40-acre.
And the number of wells that we're seeking here, 6 short laterals and 7, and then 11 short laterals and 18. These numbers would be reflective of what would be already allowed under the 131, 151 order, proportionately reduced by the size of the governmental section.
That is correct.
Okay. And so this is Exhibit D3, and I'll submit that this is really the main change for these lands that is going to come based upon what it is currently under 131.51. So if you could please describe what we're looking for here.
Yeah, so what we're looking for here is 10 long lateral horizontal wells per this 1003 special unit that we have. Again, it's going to be allocated on that 1,003-acre special drilling and spacing unit. The spacing orders, and this one in particular, are designed to protect correlative rights, and any dilution from working interest or royalty interest comes from the drainage of the resource by the wellbore it is produced.
And just so we can kind of talk a little bit about this, the cartoon, first and foremost, the number of long lateral wells being sought here are inclusive of the short lateral wells, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, maybe head off a question that I think everybody that's looked at these has had, which is this exhibit was prepared not to scale, correct?
That is correct.
So the issue being, if you look at this, it doesn't necessarily look like you could fit 10 of them in there, but trust me, if it was to scale, you could. But we've done it this way, so it was very clear what we were asking for. Moving on to the last land exhibit, which is Exhibit D4, if you could just describe what we're looking at here.
So this is a topographic map. Obviously, you can see sections 6, 7, and 18 in the irregular spacing unit there. And this would be the proposed wellbore that we would drill from an off location. And the idea there is to optimize drilling. In sections 1 and 12, there's a direct short lateral, in between short and long lateral horizontal well. This is simply just as a reference point. This is a well, the Ute Tribal 9112 that we have drilled.
And that's the closest existing horizontal well to our subject lands today, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And the purpose for putting the surface location, just I want to make sure we're absolutely clear, not in 6 is so that Crescent Point can prevent waste and recover incremental amounts of hydrocarbons from Section 6, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Were exhibits A through D4 prepared by you under your direction, supervision, and control?
Yes.
And do you believe that the relief that Crescent Point is asking for today will protect correlative rights, prevent waste, and maximize resource recovery?
Yes, I do.
I have no further questions for Mr. Stone.
Division.
Mr. Chairman, Associate Director Rogers has a question.
Proceed.
I'm thinking back to when this original spacing order was created. Why did you leave out Section 6? I'm recalling something, but I can't remember what was the issue there.
Maybe I can better answer that for you because I don't believe Mr. Stone was involved in that. We left out a bunch of those little, all down that Randalet line, there was these little, triangles that were chopped out, and we couldn't, they weren't big enough to do a full 640, to do a full short lateral horizontal in, and it was going to really overcomplicate the order if we were trying to, because what it would be is we would have to create these special units all the way down that USM line. And in some cases, there are some other areas, like as you know, on this map, for example, as you get down into this area, see there's another one right here. That one, I believe, is we don't have ownership, and so trying to bring that in might have been complex. It may have led to protests and things like that. So you are correct that there was a few of those little triangle and trapezoidal sections along the end that hadn't been included, and that was intentional. We left those out either because of operatorship issues, or we were working on a deal, or it was just simply not practical to try and put that all in the 131, 151. And quite frankly, that's the reason why we're not seeking to amend that order by pushing 6 into it. Instead, we're taking 7 and 18 out, because as you'll see, we're also changing the setbacks. We're also asking for different setbacks, and the setbacks across the 131, 151 order are uniform, and we wanted to maintain that uniformity if we could. And so it just seemed like a good idea to kind of, to the extent when we got interest, or we got operations, or we were able to work something out with the tribe or whatever it was, we decided it was easier to go back and do them piecemeal, because we didn't even know if we were going to be able to do all of them.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a few more questions, if I could.
Proceed.
Okay. Turn to Exhibit B. I don't think there is any ambiguity in your testimony, but that Mr. Doucette pointed out that the title, I think, incorrectly identifies the cause number. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So this is the notice outline that was for the 131, 153 matter.
That's correct. In the upper left-hand corner stamp identifies that. I think you're right, Mr. Alder. The title is incorrect, and just like my letter typos, I will fix that as well when it's submitted tomorrow.
I just want to be clear about that. On Exhibit C, the next exhibit, you indicate that this is all tribal. It may not matter, but do you know if there's one lease or multiple leases?
I cannot say.
Okay. If you turn to Exhibit D2, again, this is just a clarification in the language on the exhibit, but when to the right there it says 640-acre unit or governmental equivalent, what did you intend by that language? Is that just to say that this is equivalent for purposes of the rule that allows short horizontal wells to be placed without a spacing order? Or what did you mean by that language?
Essentially, it was just to proportionally reduce the amount of short lateral horizontal wells that we could put into one section based on the amount of acres that are actually in these special unit or equivalent sections, since they're obviously not 640 acres.
Okay, and so the proportional reduction results to the 6 short laterals and 11 short laterals that are shown for Section 7 and then Section 18.
Absolutely, and then we took that proportionate from CAUS 131151.
With regard to the next exhibit,
Mr. Alder, I just also wanted to note, part of that was so that the board was aware that 7 and 18, despite their acreage, are, and 6 are governmentally surveyed, you know, sections, and so make it clear that we weren't kind of taking a 640 and cutting it in half or something like that. Like, you are looking at all of Section 7.
yeah, it was a little. It's a little confusing. The question, though, that and maybe you could address this, is since there are no wells in there now, and this will be spaced.
There's one well. There's one vertical in Section 7.
Vertical, right? No horizontal. Excuse me.
No horizontal, correct.
So that the application of the rule R649-2-3 doesn't really matter as to these lands.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's why we're here, actually.
So then, the next exhibit, D3, you say there will be 10 lateral wells per the 1,000 acres, and that there is, what would be the distance between the lateral wells, or do you anticipate targeting more than one formation? If you know that.
Engineering has a diagram that will depict that,
Okay.
the well-by-well setbacks.
And then D4.
And preliminarily, Mr. Alder, the setbacks would be the same setbacks that you see in 131, 151, with the exception of the western boundary drilling unit boundary line setbacks. Those are going to be a little bit reduced, but even then, it's only. You'll see it in engineering, but it's only about 60 feet. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is that the western or the eastern? Will it be the western boundary line that's reduced?
No, I believe we're asking 560 west and 500 to the east.
Okay, so it's reduced on the east.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that's because, as you'll see, when you
get to the
when you
witness.
shoehorn into 6, you can be 560 away from the west line, but that pushes you into 500, and the further up you enter that section towards the tip of that, it was starting to really squish that in, and we didn't want to push that. So
I have a question about Exhibit D4. Do you know who is the surface owner and who is the mineral owner of that portion of Section 1 where you have the drilling location?
I do not know the surface owner, but that is our horizontal well, the 9112, and so we would have mineral rights there.
Okay, the reason for the question is, are you the person who obtains surface location approvals?
I am not.
Are you familiar with the company's process for obtaining those approvals?
Relatively, yes.
In the request, it asks for permission to have off-lease or off-drilling unit locations subject to the consent of the proper surface and subsurface estate authorization. Do you know what is intended by that language?
I'm not.
Okay.
I could respond if. The reason we wanted the flexibility to locate either on or outside of the surface, and the purpose of that language is the permission to locate it out there, assuming that we have obtained the permissions and filed with the board those permissions before using that surface location.
And there've been questions about what is meant by that language when it's included in an order. And the specific language, I think, is in paragraph Q and R on page 13 of the request for agency action. And I think it says, let me turn to it.
I can bring this up if you give me one moment.
I got it. So I'm just asking the witness, if he's not the person who obtains those authorizations, then if the question, I guess, first would be if he knows what they intend or what they usually do. Do you know?
I think engineering might have a better idea than I would.
I'll withhold the question until engineering then. Thank you.
Okay. I can bring this back up when engineering's here so we can, the board can look at the specific language, but which paragraph was it? I'm just going to leave it on it.
Q and R.
Page
13.
Yes, those two right there. Okay.
Thank you. That's just all the questions I have for this witness, Mr. Chairman.
Board members, any questions of the board? We'll start with you, Mr. Moon.
On Exhibit B, so it doesn't necessarily pertain to this hearing except for that location where you're going to locate the long horizontal well. That just covers a section and a half. Just had a general question about that. Why it only goes halfway through section 1, and I assume that's still being allocated over a 1280. But
I'm sorry, if you could read.
So that medium, it's not a long or a short. It's a medium. Yeah.
So this well right here.
Yes.
So for the record, we're on Exhibit B. The well is on the west side and is in the blue area.
I see. The question is, why is that not a 2 miler? Why is it a mile and a halfer?
Right.
I believe that would also be a question for engineering.
Okay. Fair enough. There's another one just to the section over there too. So
I'm guessing that's geology driven and not surface location permission driven. But they can answer that.
Good.
Any other questions of the board? Seeing none, we're back to you, Mr. Chickigan, for your next witness.
I would like to call Phil LeMay, who is a geologist for Crescent Point.
You haven't testified before?
Morning, Mr. LeMay.
Good morning.
If you could please state and spell your name for the record and describe your employment with Crescent Point Energy and a history of your work experience from college forward for the board, please.
Philip LeMay, PHILIPLEMAY. I graduated college in 1999 from Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana. From there, I worked for Anadarko Petroleum for about 5 years. During that time, I pursued my master's degree in geology. After that, I worked for a company, Intervest, for a little over 8 years. And then upon last year, I accepted a position with Crescent Point. I've worked there for 9 years as a geologist.
Have you ever testified before this board before as an expert in petroleum geology?
No, I have not.
Okay. Based on Mr. LeMay's resume submitted and his brief testimony and any further voir dire that the board or the division want to conduct, I would like to offer Mr. LeMay's testimony for purposes of today's hearing as expert testimony in petroleum geology.
Vision?
If I understood him to say that he'd worked for Crescent Point for 9 years in this area.
9 months, sir. I'm sorry.
9 months, okay. And where did you work for Crescent Point before?
I worked for a company, Intervest, before Crescent Point for approximately 8 years.
And where was that employment?
That was in Houston, Texas.
Okay. Are you? So your experience in the Uinta Basin is how many years? Looks like you say 40 on your. 1.5 years in your resume.
Yeah, approximately 1.5 years, and then 9 months with Crescent Point.
Okay. No objection, Mr. Chairman.
Board members, any questions? This witness is so admitted as an expert in petroleum geology for this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll move on to the first geology exhibit. This would be Exhibit E, which is basically the cause outline in some of the existing wells. Mr. LeMay, if you could please describe what's depicted on here in relation to our lands over here.
Sure. This is a base map identifying the wells drilled up to date so far in the area. The red sticks with the arrows on them are the horizontal wells drilled to date, and then the little green dots that you see on the map are the vertical wells that have been drilled in the area. And then down to the southeast, that triangle identifies the subject lands in relation to the previous wells that have been drilled in the area.
Okay. And we're correct that this right in here above this little hand in Section 7 is the only current well located on the lands at issue today?
That is correct.
Okay. And so, and am I correct in that some of the data relied on today is from these roughly adjacent horizontal wells as well, correct?
Exactly. And the subject well that's in that, we actually have done science on this well. We've cored this interval, so that's
okay.
That's also in there.
Great. So. Okay, sorry about that. I'll move on then to Exhibit E, which is a type log, and if you could please describe this.
Sure. This is a type log. The well is the Brotherson 111B4. Identifying the type log is the productive formations in the area. The upper identified with the upper Green River down through the Wasatch. This well catches a little bit of the Mesa Verde. This well is up in the northwest area. You will see on the next slide. The log on the left is a gamma ray log, and then the black line on the right is our resistivity. So this is a type well used in the area.
Okay. We'll move on to Exhibit G. If you can please describe the location of the lands in relation to the geology A and A prime wells, and how that relates to the lands at issue today.
Exhibit G coincides with our next exhibit as well, with a cross section. So as you'll see, there's an A to A prime. The northwest point is our Brotherson well. And as you move down to the southeast into the subject lands that we're talking about today, we'll see a cross-section through there identifying the geology across the basin. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide, it kind of coincides with it.
Yeah. And we'll just move on to Exhibit H so you can continue his testimony.
So this is the cross-section I was speaking of, running northwest to southeast. As you can see, the section does thin as we get into our subject lands. The Brotherson well sits to the northwest, and then our Tribal 11-7 was the well that I was speaking of that we had cored, and that well, the geology does thin as we move in that direction, and it's also a little bit shallower. You can see about 300 feet shallower in depth scale, but that's what we're representing here.
Okay. And move on to Exhibit I, which is going to show some estimated ultimate recovery bubbles in relation to the lands. The lands have not, we can point out where those lands are, but I'm just, for the board's edification, this is more of a big picture item, Exhibit I, but the lands that we're dealing with today are down here again.
Sure. This map is showing the vertical versus horizontal EUR bubbles. What we wanted to depict here was the size of the bubble for our horizontal wells in relation to the vertical wells in the area. So that's an ultimate recovery of oil and gas projected out for these wells. So the green dots are the vertical, and then the orange would be the horizontal EURs.
Okay. And we'll leave it on this. I'm sure there will be additional questions. Were exhibits D or E through I prepared by you under your supervision, direction, and control?
Yes, sir.
And do you believe, from a geology standpoint, that the relief requested in Crescent Point's request for agency action will protect correlative rights, prevent waste, and maximize resource recovery?
Yes.
Okay. I have no further questions for Mr. LeMay.
Division?
No, just one question. Mr. LeMay, can you explain the zones of the Green River Formation that exist within this area?
Sure. In the subject lands on exhibit, I'm not sure, H, the far right log is depicting what we would find perspective. It's within the upper Green River is not perspective, but if you see where it says lower Green River TGR3, those are the perspective formations from TGR3 down through the Wasatch Formation. So it includes the lower Green River on that slide.
And are these formations susceptible to horizontal drilling?
Yes, they are.
And have they, it looks like they've been also susceptible to vertical drilling.
Yes, sir.
Do you have knowledge as to whether there's interference between the vertical and the horizontal drilling to these formations?
I do not in this area. That may be an engineering, may be able to answer that. But
Okay.
Since there is no horizontal wells in the area so far, I think on that lease alone, we're not sure yet.
Okay, I guess that other questions I have would go to the engineering as well. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Board members, any questions? Okay, we'll start with Carl.
Question may be a little premature, but back in the land exhibits, it pointed out there were room for 10 long horizontals and I think 17 short. Will those be multiple zones? Are you looking at multiple zones? That I guess a total of 27 wells, or are they mutually exclusive? If you do two short laterals, does that eliminate one of the long laterals, or are we looking at multiple zones? And maybe this will come out in subsequent testimony, but I'm right at this point. I'm not certain what we're looking at here.
At the time, we're unable. We're not. I may probably defer to engineering on this question.
Okay.
We haven't tested. You know, we've taken a core in this area, so we're still examining the productive formations. At this time, we pursue one formation at this time.
Okay.
What I can tell you, Mr. Kendall, is that the number of wells we're asking for is the total number of wells. So they may be drilled in any of those formations. They could all go into the Castle Peak. You could have one Castle Peak, one Carbonate, one, Uteland Butte, but it's not going to, those stacked wells are included in that total.
Okay, I think that answers my question. Thanks.
Yeah,
Mr. Moon?
Back to my question about the 1.5 mile horizontal well, reasoning for that and how that's allocated.
So I'm just going to go back to the I'm going to go back to the exhibit so we can see what we're talking about. What he's talking about is, if you look at there was an exhibit that showed that better.
Exhibit I shows
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the one that shows it the best. It's right, and his question was specifically, and I don't know if you want to restate that, Mr. Moon, so that we're clear.
Yeah, just the reasoning behind. It looks like it could have.
Oh, I agree.
Been further north. Why is it placed there?
I think it was a permitting. We'll have to confirm with engineering, but I think it was a permitting procedure for that well specifically. Okay. Otherwise, yeah, it would have been drilled a 2-mile lateral.
Okay. And then just one other question on Exhibit F. I think I re-ask this same question at every hearing. The meaning of the green, it appears there's a correlation between the number of wells and the productivity of wells that are in that green area.
It's on a different slide.
Oh, okay. That's why we're... Hey, go down one. Yeah, on the internet, we're off a number. Yeah, so it's Exhibit G.
Sure. Those are designated pools. That's not an internal made. That's done by regulations, and those are pools, oil pools and gas pools. Those aren't internal made pools. They're
Yeah, it looks
designated.
familiar. We've seen them on.
Sure.
The different.
And that's very common in several. You know, where you have a pool. So that's what those are designated as, oil and gas pools.
So normally higher productivity from those, because there's obviously many wells that aren't in those.
Sure. I think as you drill wells, you designate them into pools, whether they include them into those pools or designate a new pool in that sense. But these wouldn't be like a Crescent Point internal identification of it. It's through.
You have like the 5 zones.
Sure.
Is this a particular zone depicted here, or is it?
I think that it's just identified as an oil pool. I think it includes several zones. And then as you can see on the far right-hand side, you'll see the red coming in. Those are the gas pools as well. So they just want to differentiate the red from the green as oil pools and gas pools.
Okay. Mr. Moon, my understanding of these is that these pools would be tied to the identification, the stratigraphic identification in the orders for those specific pools. That being said, Randlet, Aurora, Rocky Point, that's almost the same. It's almost that's the stratigraphic description is almost the same for every one of those orders. So I think they're all pretty consistent, and we just have this nice many thousands of feet of pay across this whole area, and I think almost very as the board knows, very few orders that are, you know, this is an order for the Castle Peak and only the Castle Peak and nothing but the Castle Peak. Very rare that happens.
Yeah, because this request doesn't. There's no green in this request, but obviously they're going to be, productive wells.
We're going to make some green, literally and figuratively.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Seeing none, call your next witness, please.
I'd like to call Mark Ballard for engineering testimony. Good morning. If you could please state and spell your name for the record, and give the board a brief history of your title, employment with Crescent Point, and your experience starting with college.
Okay, my name is Mark Ballard. It's spelled M-A-R-K, B-A-L-L-A-R-D. So yes, I'm a...
Mr. Chairman, unless the board wants the background information, the division would not object since he's previously qualified as an expert, unless just for purposes of your education you would want this testimony, we would waive it.
I can just ask the question. Mr. Ballard, have you previously appeared before this board as an expert in petroleum engineering?
Yes.
Okay. And can you please just restate your title with Crescent Point?
Senior Development Engineer.
Okay. Based upon his previous qualification before this board, several times actually, as an expert in petroleum engineering, I would like to request that his testimony, Mr. Ballard's testimony today, be accepted as expert testimony in petroleum engineering.
No objection.
Board? He is so admitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move directly into our exhibits. So we're on Exhibit J, which is an oil well, a cumulative oil map. Mr. Ballard, if you could please describe what's depicted here in relation to our Crescent Point's request today.
Sure. So you can see all the bubbles or circles on the map. Those are cumulative oil bubbles. Just so the bigger the bubble, the better the well. It's not necessarily tied to drainage or anything like that. Just showing where the better wells are. The arrows represent producing horizontals in and around this area. On the map or call out box on the top right, I've called out how many horizontals that Crescent Point has drilled in the basin, and those are more widespread than what this map shows. But one thing you can see from this map is there is a need for drilling both horizontals and verticals all in the same place.
Let me interrupt you for just a second to figure out your protocol. Do you put the EUR bubble over the pad location, or basically where it enters the formation, or do you do it at the end of the horizontal?
The end, the bottom hole.
Bottom hole?
Yep.
Where it first enters the formation?
No, at the end.
And the same for directionals. So where it ends.
Ends.
Yep, correct, where it ends. So if you look for those directionals, most of them are going to have the circle over the little thing on the end, not the well location. The same thing for. I know.
I was just saying, it's kind of hard to tell. So
I agree, Ms. Davis. It's we're kind of packed in tight there with wells on either side of us. So leading to our request today, and why we'd like to drill some more in between. We'll move on to Exhibit K, which is a production curve. Mr. Ballard, if you could please describe the production curve and identify some of the acronyms used in the legend for the board.
Sure. So the purpose of this exhibit is used for recovery factor calculations to show on the next couple of exhibits. But what you're looking at here is a production profile for a producing horizontal well, the Deep Creek 159-4-2E GR. In green, you can see the oil production, and so the axis for that is the vertical axis. The horizontal is the date. In red is GOR, or gas oil ratio. Then there's a kind of oil forecast projected out on this particular well. This well is projected to make 200 MBBL, or 200,000 barrels of oil.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to Exhibit L, which is our recovery factor calculations. Again, if you could describe the recovery factor, the basis, and some of these acronyms, and what the meaning of each one of those is in relation to those calculations.
Okay. Yep. So this shows how you calculate the total oil in place for a set area, and so looking at a section where you have 16 vertical wells drilled up in the section 2631E. So kind of running from top to bottom, you got A area in that section, 640 acres. The net kind of pay is 130 feet. The pore is the porosity, so there's 7% pore space in the rock. Water saturation at 50%, or 0.50. B sub O is a formation volume factor, just converting the volume of barrels you'd see in the bottom hole to what you'd see in surface. You put those all together in an equation, and you calculate that there's 19,145 MBBL of original oil in this section. If you go in and forecast all the individual vertical wells separately, and then add up their forecasted EURs, they're forecasted to make 1,130 MBBL. So that's about 5.9% of the original oil in place. But that's still not really something that you're not recovering everything. So then if you introduce horizontal wells into that section, you drilled 12 horizontals per 640, you would yield a 18% recovery factor with all the producing horizontals and the producing verticals. And that's just more something that's in line with what you kind of expect when you fully develop a field.
Thank you. We'll move on to Exhibit M, and this is as we had described. This is kind of the setback differences from the 151 order. So, Mr. Ballard, if you could please describe the setbacks that we're requesting and the reasons for that shorter east line setback.
Sure. So what you're looking at here, the red arrow is the horizontal well. Those black dashed lines represent the fractures. You can kind of see their orientation is directed northwest and kind of southeast, not perfect east-west. And then the triangle there would just be meant to represent the irregular shaped unit boundary that would be we're looking at here. So since the eastern unit boundary for the meridian line doesn't run directly north and south, we're looking for a different setback from or to that eastern boundary than we are the west. So if you look at kind of the angle of the fractures, in both cases we're looking at 560 feet to the west line, and then or more, and then 500 feet to the east line. So the direction from those fractures to the respective lines are going to be roughly the same distance, which is about 300 feet. So in other words, if you look at the kind of the fracture half length going to the west, that for the 560 foot setback, that'll be about 300 feet from that section line. And then if you look at the fracture half length going to the east, that will also be 300 feet from the meridian line, just due to the orientation of how the fractures grow.
Move on to Exhibit N, and I think this also gets at Mr. Kendall's question a little bit, where we're talking about, what does it look like if you have a full development, mixed vertical and horizontal? Again, recognizing that to do these fully to scale, if we thought we were having trouble seeing things before, we tried, and it's like looking at tiny pieces of string, laying on spaghetti. It's difficult. So, but if you can describe what we're attempting to show with this exhibit, notwithstanding the scale issues, Mr. Ballard.
Yes. So this is meant to show an example of how full development could look for this DSU. In the cartoon on the left, you can see producing, we've got a long lateral in green dashed line, and the short laterals in the red, and then the blue circles would be vertical wells. But that's just kind of looking at it from a map view. So if you can kind of picture how you would stack laterals from the formation, you kind of look at the right. So really, beneath the green dash line on the left, you could stack 6 horizontals pretty easily, or even more than that. I'm just showing 6. There's a lot of room in between these formations to stack horizontal. So you can see Garden Gulch horizontal, a Douglas Creek horizontal, a Black Shell horizontal, a Castle Peak horizontal, a Uteland Butte horizontal, and a Wasatch horizontal. And we could do that for the short laterals as well, up to the amount of wells that we're requesting. So while it looks like there might not be a ton of room from the cartoon on the left, if you kind of look at a 3D view of it, there's a lot of upside for where this basin's going. And
I'm correct that the Crescent Point request for agency action in this matter does provide for at least a 100-foot vertical separation between those stacked wells, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. But no lateral setback between those wells for obvious reasons, because they're on top of each other.
Correct.
Okay. We'll move on to Exhibit O, which is some of our liner types that we're using. If you could describe the two types here, and kind of compare and contrast a little.
Yeah, so this is shows 2 common completion types. When we're drilling wells, you've got 3 casing strings. You've got a surface hole in both cases, an intermediate hole that so the 7-inch intermediate is set at the heel of the horizontal, and then where these two cases get different, you've got a liner on the cemented liner on the left. You're just running a smaller casing string inside the 7-inch and cementing that all the way back to where the intermediate string is. The open hole swell packers on the right, you're also running a liner, but you're setting packers in between where you're perforating instead of cementing all the way back up. In both cases, you've got cement covering your setbacks, where you'd be, I guess, as set for this cause.
Okay. We'll move on to the final engineering exhibit, which is the economic summary, and and if you could go through that economic summary for the horizontal wells and the assumptions that were made based on that. And I know we've got our production curve earlier on that relates to this, but if you could just rehash some of that so it's all in one exhibit here.
Yeah, and I think you guys have seen this before. But this table shows for a 1 mile well a capital cost and those economics of $3,500 or $3.5 million, and then for $5 million, and then for a 2 mile well, the capital cost is $6.5 million and $7.5 million, and the economics for those. So for a 1 mile well, we're saying the 200,000 barrel EUR that we showed you earlier. I've got a net present value there for just looking at the top row, the 1,462. That's in thousands of dollars. You've got a rate of return of 21% and a payout of 3.7 years. And these are all kind of within our hurdles that we're looking to meet. And then below the table, just kind of listed some of the assumptions that go into the economics. I'll call out, so starting an economic start date of Jan 1, 2017, 18.75% royalties, and a fee severance tax regime. Cycle time, just saying how long it takes to get the well producing from the time that you spud it, and then a few assumptions on gas and oil as well.
As to gas oil ratio and your gas surface loss as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Were exhibits J through P prepared by you or under your direction, supervision, and control?
Yes.
Do you believe the Crescent Point's request for agency action will protect correlative rights, prevent waste, and maximize resource recovery?
Yes.
I have no further questions for Mr. Ballard.
Division.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the board's permission, Mr. Doucette has a question for the witness.
Proceed.
Yeah, if you could turn to Exhibit K.
Production curve, correct?
Yeah, so my question is, where's that well at this Deep Creek 15942E well located in relation to the subject lands?
It's in Section 9 of 4 South 2 East, which is within 6 miles of the outline. So it would be.
I don't think it's on there.
Yeah, it is. It's the furthest west, kind of light pink well labeled on the map
right here.
Okay, so that would be correlative to this area, is what you're saying by including it in this exhibit. Then
yes.
As far as formation, what I think it says on there, is that the Castle Peak formation?
Yes.
So as far as, if we go back to K, as far as the recovery, is that going to be similar to the other horizons that you're possibly be doing horizontals in?
Yeah, possibly, yes. We We don't have producing horizontal wells in all of the horizons just yet, but this definitely is in the range of what we've seen from other horizons as well.
Okay. If you could turn to Exhibit M really quick.
M?
M, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So on these fracture half lengths, where have you derived this information as far as, you know, the distances and whatnot?
Mainly from microseismic data.
So about how many wells would you think you've run that on, and are they in the area?
Yes, so we in the area roughly 6. So really quite a few.
Okay, and are they different formations, or would they mainly be Castle Peak, or?
We have tested in other formations, and they are all kind of within this same
spec.
ballpark.
Yeah. Okay. And then just one more question on Exhibit O. So I know we've had some discussions recently about potentially doing away with intermediate casing. How would this scenario change if you did not have the intermediate casing? Would you be running swell packers in that case, and what would your situation be with the cement, etc.?
Yeah, good question. So what Mr. Doucette's asking, if you will focus on the cemented liner option, imagine instead of having the 7-inch intermediate, just stop at the bottom of the curve there. That same size pipe just goes all the way to the end of the lateral. So we would still cement from the lateral back up to surface. With the very least, we'd be getting cement past the setbacks.
So in that case, you would not use swell packers?
That is correct.
Okay. And so you feel that would protect those minerals that are beyond that setback?
Yes.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks.
And Mr. Rogers has one question.
Proceed.
Could we go to Exhibit N?
This one, correct?
Yes. You're asking for 11 short laterals per 640 and 10 long laterals for the whole spacing unit. And I'm wondering, as we look at this diagram, in the best case, you're going to have 6 zones possibly producing on top of each other?
No, that's not I guess that was more of an example of what a development could look like. These the vertical setbacks between wells stacked on top of each other is set at 100 feet, and if you look at even the bottom 4 for what we've kind of targeted from distance between Wasatch and Ute Butte is about 300 feet. So you could fit another horizontal in between there for what we've been targeting, as well as Ute Butte to Castle Peak is about the same, and same for Black Shale. So there's more targets really of stacked laterals that you could fit in there, which is actually really kind of pretty exciting, gives you goosebumps thinking about how much potential there is.
Well, that's a concern. So what you're saying is you never really could have this scenario, or you could have even better than this scenario with more horizontals than the 6 you're looking at?
You could, yes.
Okay, and that's the issue I have is, okay, if we're looking down here on the figure to the left, you have the trace of the surface of that well, right? I mean, let's say look at that red line in the bottom. You could have 6 wells below that, right?
Correct.
Okay, if I'm looking at 6 wells and you got 4 to 5 across, that's 30 to 36 wells, correct?
Yes, we would have to come back and ask for approval for more.
What I'm asking at this time is, why are you only asking for the 10? I mean, if we're looking at waste and preventing waste, I mean, do we want to be back here again, or do you want to just test this, so to speak?
Yeah, we are. It's kind of a balance between short-term needs and kind of long-term needs. We're wanting to drill a well pretty quickly, and we don't want to kind of push the boundary to the risk of not getting it approved necessarily. For short-term needs, we would like to get it approved sooner.
We've seen other board matters come before this where they've, approved a lot more wells than this. So I'm just saying, something to think about. Another question,
Mr. Rogers, maybe if I can, I want to go back to an exhibit here and help you a little with this, because so when we did Randlet, we figured, because we could have asked for the same thing in Randalet, right? We could have asked for, similar to like an AXI application or something like that. We wanted to stay consistent, and so when we go to like this one, for example, let me show you. When we ask for 11 short laterals in here, this is 11 short laterals will fit across with the 330-foot setbacks. Okay. So it doesn't look like you could fit 11 and 18 right there, or that you could fit 6 and 7, but you can. And so that would be consistent with the spacing that's already on there, and we wanted to maintain that consistency. And so you're absolutely right. We could have asked for a lot more wells here, but we wanted to be consistent because when Crescent Point is drilled enough, then we can come back and we can seek to ask for all of those wells in not only this one and the other special units we do along this USM line and the 131, 151 order.
So given the future with success, hopefully you would come back and look at something similar to what we have in Ann with the several stacked pays.
Correct, where they're stacked and staggered as well. So you could do both, and we'd be able to do that. But right now, this spacing allows them to drill any of those and test any of those formations. And who knows? I mean, maybe that's maybe this is the Uteland Butte sweet spot, and they're all going to be Uteland Butte wells. We don't know. And so part of this is, this does kind of also fit into the board's kind of pilot program, trying out different spacing methods type thing. And we just maybe, there's a part of it where we don't want to kind of ask for more than we, for significantly more than we know that we need right now. We may need it, and there's no doubt, and we may have to come back. But I don't know that they know they need it immediately right this second.
Well, the division just wanted to try to understand your strategy. Could we go back to N again? Okay. So as you look at, if you had, let's look at 6, 7, and 8, you could put a long lateral in there, correct? From a green well, let's say, from 7 through 8.
Yes.
Would that count as 2 short horizontals in each section? Is that how you're looking at that? Okay. And then I notice you look at your green one that extends over 3 sections. Is that going to be the longest lateral you've drilled out in this area?
Yes.
Have you had any success anywhere else around the country with something that long?
I don't know if Crescent Point specifically has. There are a lot of operators in the Bakken, or not a lot. Some operators drilling a full 3-mile laterals. Okay. So it's not unheard of. But there's a couple of characteristics here that really help us to be able to push that boundary.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just a couple additional questions. And we stay on this exhibit. Do you agree that the long horizontal wells provide a greater recovery of resource per well than a short lateral?
Yes.
I mean, short horizontal. And so, can you explain, and how long have you been working on these drilling programs for Crescent Point?
For 3.5 years.
So all the prior orders that have been approved, and you've done the drilling and been involved with the drilling on those?
Yes.
And I know the board has looked for some feedback as to how that program has worked out, and previously we've asked Crescent Point why they didn't include more long laterals rather than short laterals to maximize production. I think the time there was uncertainty as to how that would work out. Can you elaborate more on what your current philosophy is about short versus long horizontal wells?
Yeah, without getting into kind of confidential specifics of how many of which well we're drilling, our main focus is to shift more towards the long laterals, which is why you're also seeing this over 2 mile lateral shown in this this example. A lot of the drilling this year is in the kind of 2 mile lateral, or excuse me, long lateral drilling. There are a few cases where we are drilling short laterals, where maybe the geology is not quite consistent for a full 2 miles.
And so that's the subsurface geology is uneven, is that?
That's correct.
And can you explain sort of the same question about the vertical wells? It would seem like, looking at this exhibit, that rather than, are the vertical wells because of the sort of constraints of the surface ownership, or are there some other reasons for those vertical wells to be drilled?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a combination of things. Yes, the constraints of being able to fit a horizontal near maybe the meridian line might be an issue, but another reason why you might drill a vertical is you don't necessarily, you know where the horizontal zones are, but you don't know within the exact 20 feet or so where the zone's going to be up or down. And so to be able to kind of steer your horizontals into these formations, you need to have some kind of well control there to be able to know where to drill, which is why we drilled our the first well in section 7 of this outline, just to further understand what was there. We knew the zones were there, we just didn't know how exactly the log properties looked and where we'd steer horizontals offset them.
So would it be fair to say that if you have enough vertical wells to have location of these formations, that you would prefer to drill horizontal wells?
Yes.
Okay. On exhibit K and L, so exhibit, yes, that exhibit, is that K? So it shows that there's gas ratio, that's the red line on the top there, is that right?
That's correct.
Is there a substantial amount of gas from these wells, from this well?
Yes, so this particular well, the gas oil ratio has escalated much quicker than maybe other places. Excuse me, in the area.
And does Crescent Point market its gas?
Yes.
And so then turn to the next exhibit. I don't understand these numbers very well, but do you discount or not include the gas as a value?
No. So the production that we get from these wells, or at least in this area, is typically 80 to 90% oil, and so when we're talking about recoveries, we're more focused on the oil, but yes, there are kind of gas recoveries to consider as well.
I think so. That exhibit, if you go back to it, is a conservative estimate of the production that's recovered from these lands. Does not include the gas.
This exhibit, that's correct. Yep.
And then I guess maybe you were going to go to the other exhibit that talks about the ultimate recovery for the that one there. That also does that include gas or not?
I'm not showing gas numbers in the table on the top in that EUR, but I do have gas included in the economics. So there's a line item there saying an escalating GOR, so the 800 to 3,000 SCF per barrel escalating GOR. That's just saying that we are accounting for gas in the well, and those are rolled up in those economics as well.
Okay, thank you. And then you probably heard me ask Mr. Stone about the off-site locations. Are you familiar with what Crescent Point typically does to obtain permission for off-lease surface locations?
I'm not directly involved in the process, but loosely aware.
So can you tell the board what you understand to be meant by acquisition of proper surface and subsurface estate authorizations for off-site wells?
Yeah, so I think for this purpose, we've referenced or we've notified all of the surface owners in the boundary area for the particular permits that we're submitting. You had asked about the surface and mineral owner mix. That is all their tribal surface as well as tribal minerals for all the wells that we'd be looking at here. Yeah, that is about as much as I.
So, but anyway, so for these lands, there's not an issue. And even looking Exhibit D4, which shows the off-site location for the one proposed well, if you could put that up.
Sorry.
Exhibit D4.
And before I take this off, Mr. Alder, also I want to note, like, when I draft these, I also put this in the order and in the request. And the reason I do that is because, you know, Crescent Point may not end up being the operator of every well in these areas we own, and it, you know, we're coming to get the order, but we may not be the operator. And I just like to make it abundantly clear, and I know there's rules that cover this, but I want to make it abundantly clear that it doesn't really matter whether you're inside or outside the unit. You need to have those proper surface permissions, and you have to cement to that 330-foot setback. And so I want that to be abundantly clear. This prevents people from trying to wiggle out of things under the rule. It makes it an order, and they've got to do this stuff. So
yeah, I don't think the order necessarily covers the question of permission from the.
That's correct. That's correct. It doesn't go into great detail, but it's more protection for the surface owner. It was the intent. It was my intent in including it there. So, but
I know, and I'm sorry to focus on this because it's sort of a side issue, but I would just like to be clear in the order. So if you look at that
I'm going to D4.
I mean, I think the question is, if you're coming off of land, drilling down into an area where you are not going to be producing, but somebody else might be, so some other party could own the minerals in Section 1 and would be drilling and producing in that area. Is there an issue in your mind about interference between your well going over to Section 7 and producing from Section 1?
No. So any of these particular wells, we wouldn't be, I don't know how to describe this. We wouldn't be drilling straight down in the formation in Section 1 and then drilling that same formation all the way down through 6, 7, and 18. We'd be kind of coming at an angle down to start drilling in through the Green River zone starting in Section 6.
Okay, so, and just to be clear, so to get permission to drill that well from Section 1 over to Section 7, you'd obtain written consent from the surface owner? Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, well, yes, of course. We have a surface use agreements with all of our landowners.
And would you attempt to obtain any consent from the mineral owner?
We do own the lease for this area.
And if you didn't?
Then yes, we would.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Board members, any question? Carl? Cool.
What oil and gas price did you use in your economics, and did you escalate those prices with time?
Yeah, so I used a $55 WTI, and that is escalating 2% each year. Understanding that WTI has gotten higher since then, so the wells would look even better.
Okay, and also unrelated question on your fracture orientation. You mentioned you used, I think it was 6 microseismic orientations. Does these orientations you put on your illustration, are they consistent over these 6 microseismic, or is that an average amongst the group? How would you characterize that information?
It's consistent.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Have a question?
Going back to Exhibit N, which is my Exhibit M, but in any case, it's the one that's the cartoon. Yeah, that one. You've shown all the vertical wells over by the line. I assume that is not the case. They're just going to be drilled where you think they need to be drilled.
Yeah, we will. I mean, this is one potential development scenario where we will drill them where we think we need to drill them.
I understand that Crescent Point owns all of the mineral rights to this section. My concern is going forward when we've got mixed vertical and horizontal, how we determine when they compete. So how close do you anticipate those verticals being to the horizontals, and will they drain similar formations?
So
these guys own
I know that's a tough question.
yeah.
But it's something that we struggle with.
And I don't know that necessarily applies to this cause, like you said, because
It does not. I understand that, but when we set a precedent, I worry about what happens when somebody comes in and there's a competitor in this section.
Yeah, and I think that's why we are going with the overlapping spacing units as well, to protect those rights. So the verticals will all get paid on their 40s, plus if they happen to be in the short lateral, or if they're in the long lateral, they'll get paid on those as well.
So a vertical, if it's drilled, would pay mineral owners based on a 40-acre spacing, and a horizontal would be based on either 640 or 1280 spacing?
Yes, 640 equivalent, or 1280 equivalent.
So in this picture, you've got one longer than 1280. So that longer than 1280 is going to get paid.
It will get paid on the all of the acres in that unit, which is 1,003 acres. Which yes, it's less than 1,280 acres, but yes, it's longer than a 2-mile lateral. You'll see.
So section 6, 7, and 8 would all pay out on that long horizontal.
Yes.
But the verticals are only going to pay out on 40 acres.
That is correct.
But those 40-acre owners own in the horizontals too.
Right, and I understand that. As you know, Mr. Chicken, this could happen in a different scenario.
It absolutely can.
And it has.
Yeah.
And Oklahoma is struggling with this right now. So I'm not concerned here. I'm concerned about setting precedent for other sections that have more mixed mineral lease ownership.
Well, if it's mixed, then you wouldn't set a precedent because it wouldn't be applicable because it would be mixed. That would be your counter argument, right? You just say, "Hey, folks, you don't own the whole thing. got to do it different.
Questions? Mr. Moon.
Yeah, so so under this overlapping spacing, you do have setbacks from the 40-acre lines. There's setbacks from the whole section. Are those all 330 from the section? What are the setbacks from the 40 lines?
Yeah, I'll pull.
For a vertical well?
Right, here you go.
Mr. Moon, is that a vertical well or?
Well, I guess both. Okay, so it's 560, 500, and then 330 between each.
Correct, and this is just for horizontals. The verticals are equivalent to the rule.
Okay.
They're the same. They're this. Yeah, they're like they would be the same setbacks for those, and then their setbacks in between verticals. You still have to. You have it in your 40, and you've got your little tolerance in the middle of where you can move it within 200 feet. But then you still have to be in this section. This is very different than what we did a month or two ago with Blacktail, because we had 640s. We had verticals on 640s already with 4-well density, so we didn't need setbacks between verticals and horizontals because everybody was getting paid the same on every drop of oil that came out of there. This case, we've got 330-foot setbacks from vertical wells, 330-foot setback between horizontals, 560 on the west side, 500 to accommodate that triangle-ness, what you're going to call it, on the east side, and then the traditional 330 heel and toe.
Yeah, so with a vertical well in a 40, say, there still is room on either side of it to drill horizontal wells within the setbacks.
Yep.
So just to kind of pull you into our continuing discussion about converting versus overlapping, one of the arguments for or against the overlapping is that you have all these setbacks that constrain where you can put wells. As far as Crescent Point's concerned, how much effect does that have on your well planning, having these interwell setbacks based on the overlapping spacing?
Yeah, like I mean, the biggest thing for us is we don't want to be drilling horizontals that are going to be a detriment to our vertical wells. We've got one section in 31E where we've got a horizontal well drilled, and then you've got 8 producing wells on each side of it. And so for that particular instance, we haven't seen any interference between the wells, and it kind of fits in with our planning. It also further proves those kind of fracture half-lengths distances that we're showing here.
Because, yeah, in other cases, I believe in Crescent Points also, you've shown this zigzag. When you're drilling all 5 or 6 horizons, there's kind of the zigzag or offset. And each one of those offsets, well, quite often those would come within that 330-foot.
Well, but there's no setback that way. So if I've got, imagine this hand is 5 wells, and these are all zigzag. I don't know if I can move my things.
Right.
There's no setback in between those zigzag wells. So
right.
These 2 wells have to be 100 feet apart, but vertically, but they could be laterally right on top of each other, or 10 feet away, or whatever, and that's what allows you to do that.
Right. But there is some constraint because you do have those extra, 3 lines in there in each section that you have to stay 330 feet from, and that's what others have argued is a significant constraint, and that's why.
And I think Crescent, absolutely. But I think Crescent Point's view is when we're, from a legal and correlative right standpoint, when you're faced with a constraint of having to drill within setbacks versus the constraint of mathematically diluting every single person in that entire 1,280-acre section, they'll take them having to deal with setbacks rather than diluting everybody.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of that was one of the reasons that Crescent Point, about 2 years ago started deciding to do this way, because the dilution, as you're all aware, is, the operator's got to do what the operator's got to do in the field to get the setbacks right. That's a lot easier than fighting every single mineral owner in a section or in a 1280 because they're all being diluted or they're all being bootstrapped up to a 1280 or something. And I think that decision was made a long time ago.
Right. And it's really just when you get way further into more full.
Oh yeah,
production,
it only happens once you start getting those wells so stacked in there that you've got to really start paying attention to that stuff. So
right. For a while, it's not going to be a big concern. But okay, just kind of one because that's what we're continuing to discuss, and we'd like to have more of a standard. Because we're basically every other board hearing we're
different.
And so we're just trying to understand how important those things are. So.
We've now changed your hat from senior development engineer to professor. I'm going to continue to ask you, Professor Ballard, a couple more questions. If you'll turn to Exhibit O. And on the open hole swell packers, I am not familiar with swell packers. How do you insert those, or how are they put into the well? Because they're in the annulus, is that correct?
Yes. Similar to the cemented liner, you're running this smaller pipe inside your all the way down to TD. So you're in this case we're doing 4.5-inch casing. You both scenarios you set it all the way to TD, and then on the cemented liner you just pump cement back up. On the swell packer, you circulate a different kind of mud system that will these packers will just swell up, and so instead of cementing, the packers just kind of fill that void in the annulus.
And so you put them down the pipe and then run them out there.
So you'll run like 300 feet of pipe, and then in between that you'll screw in the swell packer and run another 300 feet, and then screw in a packer.
So you actually put those on before you at the surface.
At the surface. Yeah.
Okay,
and then
that answers my
you
question.
Make them swell.
It's like a
and then
donut that grows as it goes down. I'll explain it. It's like a pencil through a donut, and it gets bigger.
All right, and then Exhibit P.
I'm sorry, E?
P is in Papa.
Oh, P. Oops. There you
go. On the third column, you have BTN PV8. Tell me what that means.
So before tax, so BT is before tax, and then NPV is net present value, and then it's discounted at 8%. Different companies use different discount ratios to define their NPV, and
that's correct, and that's my question on Professor Ballard. On PVN, we normally see NPV, pardon me, of 10.
Mm-hmm.
What factors go into determining the difference between a NPV 10 and an NPV 8?
Yeah, it's really just a company's preference. If you're really going to look at what your true value is, you got to look at what your cost, your capital is. So what interest rates are you paying on your loans to get your money, and then from there, that's what you should probably be discounting your NPV at.
So let's say you have a higher cost of capital. Would that push you into a net present value of 10, or would that push you more toward the net present value 8?
Yeah, and it's not just your interest in your loans. There's a calculation, WACC, weighted average cost of capital, and we paid a dividend, and so your dividend percent kind of gets weighted into that. So there's a lot of other factors. But yes, if you are paying more for these either your debt or your dividends, you would probably want to realize a higher interest rate on your net present value.
Thank you. Any other question, board members? Go back to you, Mr. Moon.
Yeah, just one more quick question. So the most common scenario is you have vertical wells, and then you come in and go toward horizontal wells. What's the likelihood once an area is somewhat drilled up horizontally, going back in and doing vertical wells to access additional resource? I mean, in our area, it would just be, your best guess, but do you see that in other areas that happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are definitely still reasons to even go back down the road with verticals. Right now we're just talking about primary recovery. Once you kind of get into the water flood, secondary or tertiary recovery techniques, maybe you need vertical wells to, I don't know, better isolate injection zones or something like that, to then push more oil out to your horizontals.
But once you go toward horizontals, it does appear that you pretty much are recovering most of the resource the most economic way through horizontal wells.
Yeah, and that's where technology's kind of taken us in the last 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
Other follow-up questions? Mr. Alder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could turn to Exhibit C, Mr. Moon got us all curious as to why those wells are only.
For the record, let's be clear what exhibit we're on.
C.
C's and Charlie.
It's just a good one to show it. There's others. So if you see the well that starts in Section 1, just to the west of the subject lands, and then there's another one in Section 3. I think Mr. Moon asked, and Mr. Rogers noted that we didn't get an answer why those are only a section and a half.
Yeah, so in Section 1 into Section 12 specifically, Philip had alluded in the geology testimony that that's the permit that we had available to drill that area. But no, so it's that particular is twofold: permit driven. We didn't have any approved permits to drill.
Permit from who?
I was just gonna ask.
It's a tribal permit, so just a longer timeline to get that kind of thing approved. So that's that well, the Ute tribal, so tribal surface and then tribal minerals, 911242E H1. Also geologically, the reservoir gets better as you head south for the formation that was targeted in that interval, in that well.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we're back to you. Let's let the division go first, and then we'll come back and admit your exhibits.
I'm going to be quick. So,
and but if you'd like to say something now,
I guess in closing, the only thing I would say is, we've got exactly what we're asking for, other than the setbacks already in 7 and 18. So, again, Crescent Point wants to take this triangle-shaped piece out of 131, 151, impose the same exact regulatory scheme on that's under 131, 151, with the exception of the 60-foot shorter setbacks on that eastern side, and this is going to allow them to continue developing over here. And something that nobody's mentioned before that kind of waxes and wanes is that we're drilling tribal minerals here, and as this board will remember, this has been an issue under these EDAs with Crescent Point and the tribe, and they've come a long way in the last 2 years to strengthen their relationship and to get more tribal minerals drilled. And a perfect example of Mr. Moon's question is that permit probably took a solid 5 years to get it. If we go in now knowing more and say, oh, well, we want to move that thing in another half section north, that might take another 5 years to get that little piece permitted, and so that we're taking what we can get in those tribal areas. But this is helping Crescent Point to meet those expectations of the tribe and the BLM to drill those tribal minerals. And so, subject to admission of the exhibits and the board's consideration, we would request that the request for agency action in cause number 131-153 be approved.
Division?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The division just wants me to indicate to the board that we support the request. I would like to indicate that I think the exhibits were particularly clear and helpful, and appreciate all their attention to our questions, and we ask that you approve it.
To the board, any additional questions? Then let's go to the exhibits, and I second that. I thought the exhibits were very helpful, just a cut above for this hearing.
Thank you. That's my clients, not me, but thank you.
Okay, I'm going to handle this next step in 3 parts. Exhibits A through P. Going to look at those. Any objections to anyone to those being admitted?
No objection.
Board? Yeah, and noting that Exhibit N is the full development exhibit, and as presented today, they'll be conforming to what is
correct. I'm going to provide the division with exactly what this board looked at today.
Okay.
And the only change to it is going to be the typo of the 131-151 on the one exhibit. I believe it was Exhibit B title is going to get changed, but all the other stuff is going to be unchanged, just to fix the numbering or the lettering error.
Okay. And then, so exhibits A through P, as in Papa, are admitted. Then the witness's resume will be the next exhibit, which would be Q.
Correct. I will send that with Q, and those were previously submitted to the division on the 29th of January.
And then you asked for administrative notice of not only the order, but the testimony in 131-151, is that correct?
Correct, and for that matter, well, I asked for 131-149, 131-150, and 131-151, and that's just the iteration of the Randlet spacing. The reason I asked for all 3 of them is if the board recalls, 131-151, which is the final order for that area that encompasses all the prior ones, we are sticking in that one section that was a problem throughout that other period, and so there wasn't a lot of testimony on 1280s, long laterals. That testimony was primarily in 149, 150. But this board is I believe, well aware, and these are relatively recent orders, and the board's well aware of that testimony and exhibits from those other matters.
I think for purposes of this hearing, what we're going to do is take administrative notice of the previous orders in 131, 149, 131, 150, and 131, 151. For the purposes of this, the testimony part of it gets into some
that's fine. I'm just trying to be inclusive of everything, but the orders themselves bear out what this board would need to know.
That's correct.
For this one, correct.
And so we'll take administrative notice of those orders, and so noted in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And with that, then,
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if the record is clear that the letter submitted by the BLM has been accepted as part of the record.
it's not clear, and that is also admitted for the purposes of this hearing. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr.
With that, then, I think we're to the board for a deliberations or a motion. Okay, let's take a motion. Do you want to make that motion, Mr. Moon?
Yeah, I would move that we approve this request.
Okay, is there a second to that? Any discussion? The motion before you is to approve the request for agency action as submitted. I think that's it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Let the record show that that was unanimous. And Mr. Chicken, will you prepare the draft order?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I will. Thank you, board members, and thank you to the members of the division as well.
And thank you for enduring the, Professor Ballard, the additional questions. With that, then, we are going to go off the record. No, we are going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Let the record show that was unanimous, and we're now off the record. Julianne, we are going to go in and have a deliberation. On our forms, do we put half a day or a full day, just for everyone to know?
See, I'm not always the reason you're late.
Half a day or full day? Okay.
Sometimes I'm the reason you leave early.
Cool.